All very welcome to our 8th webinar in the Irish Bioenergy Association webinar series. This morning's topic is on the biogas area, where we look at the policies and actions required to mobilise a large-scale biogas industry. I'm just going to now share my screen. So just a small introduction about the Irish Bioenergy Association. We are the representative body for the bioenergy sector on the island of Ireland. The sectors of biomass, biogas, biofuels, energy crops and wood fuels. We work on behalf of our members through representation, lobbying, advocacy, technical support, advice, knowledge and information sharing. We're also involved in a number of research projects, our biogas demonstration project, our Interreg 3C project, our biomass installers and designers register, and also the wood fuel quality assurance scheme. And to become a member, you can find out more on our website. And my own name is Sean Finan. I am the CEO of the Irish Bioenergy Association. And this morning we're delighted to be joined by Percy Foster, who is CEO of CRAE, which is the Composting and Anaerobic Digestion Association of Ireland, by Noel Gavigan, our Technical Executive in the Irish Bioenergy Association, and they will both present their presentations to you after I give a few introductory slides myself. There will be a panel discussion towards the end of the session this morning with Q&A where we will all be present for to take any questions that you have. And if any attendees, if you have any questions, you can submit them through the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and we will endeavour to answer as many of your questions as possible during the Q&A. Just a quick reminder that our 9th webinar will take place on Wednesday, the 21st of October, while today we're focusing on the medium to large scale biogas sector. We will focus on the small farm scale biogas sector at our next webinar, and that will run from 9:30 to 10:30. So the topic will be finalised in the coming days, and we'll publish details on our social media channels, and we look forward to welcoming you back in 2 weeks' time for our next webinar. So just by way of introduction for this morning's topic, there's significant potential to develop an Irish biogas industry. There are many waste streams and residues available as feedstock to feed this industry. Percy, during his presentation, will outline to you the significant benefits that an industry could bring to Ireland, and Noel will very clearly demonstrate how this industry is a mainstream industry across Europe. Biogas has the potential to address heat, electricity and transport renewable energy targets. However, support is required to bridge the price between fossil gas and the cost of production of biogas. There's also significant opportunities through jobs and economic development in rural areas for this sector, and this is a new industry for Ireland, but we do need political leadership in order to make this industry mobilise this industry, and policy and actions are required also. So who are we? We work closely with CRAE in our lobbying efforts in this space. So ERBIA and CRAE work jointly to represent approximately 260 members in the bioenergy sector. Both ERBIA and CRAE are members of the EBA, the European Biogas Association. ERBIA is a member of Bioenergy Europe, and CRAE is a member of the European Compost Network. So we're well represented at a European level across the main European bodies associated with the bioenergy sector. Recently, or in the last year, ERBIA and CRAE have signed a memorandum of understanding where we have agreed through collaboration to work together on the objective of working to establish a biogas industry, or sustainable biogas and anaerobic digestion industry in Ireland. And we have signed a memorandum of understanding to that effect, and we have published our paper, our joint paper, policy paper, which we'll be outlining this morning as part of our webinar. So because this morning's participants, we've looking at the attendance list, we have quite a varied audience, and not everyone would be fully aware of what biogas is. So this slide just gives you an idea and tells you exactly what biogas is. So I'll start in the middle. so the technology to produce biogas is called anaerobic digestion technology. Anaerobic digestion can be either wet digestion or dry digestion. So you can have it in a wet or a dry form. So the feedstock is fed into the system. The feedstock can come from a variety of sources. It can be energy crops, example grass, it can be organic waste, it can be household food waste, or indeed animal byproducts like slurry and meat plant residues, belly grass and the like. So all those materials can be fed into the anaerobic digestion system in a wet or dry form, and the bacteria will work within the system to create a gas, and that gas can be either turned into electricity, it can be turned into used for heating, used for fuel, or indeed it can be pumped onto the gas grid. And that gas is made up of 60% biogas, up to 30% CO2 and 10% of other waste gases. So there is a cleaning process that has to be completed after the gas is produced for it to be used in electricity, in heat, or in transport, or pumped onto the gas grid, and that's what we call upgrading. And then the material that's left after the end of the process is called digestate, and digestate is a fertilizer material which can be spread on the land and offers significant benefits to soil fertility and to soils compared to conventional slurry, as nutrients are available in a different form and more readily accessible to the plant, the grass plant, or the plant that it is fertilizing. So that just gives you a summary of what biogas is for anyone that isn't sure of it and just that might be joining us this morning. As part of our development of our policy paper between CRE and ERBIA, we have consulted, or we did consult widely with ERBIA and CRE members, farm organisation representatives, as farmers are key stakeholders in the development of a biogas industry, statutory bodies, and also semi-state organisations. So we have consulted widely in the development of our paper, which was published over a year ago now. So just a small bit of context for our lobbying and the document. So we have the National Energy and Climate Plan has been submitted to the EU Commission. The REDS directive currently sets out a 32% target for renewable energy, but the ambition in this is likely to increase. The Department of Agriculture and the government have a national policy statement on the bioeconomy, which we believe this sector fits very well into, and it's part of the bioeconomy. A number of years ago, we had the Joint Oireachtas Committee report on climate action, and they recommended that a national strategy for sustainable anaerobic digestion be completed. We would see our document as being effectively a strategy for how an industry can be mobilised. The agricultural sector has emissions levels of 32%, and this needs to be reduced. And there's a lot of discussion at various forums about this. And this sector biogas industry can contribute to that. And then we had the government climate action plan published by the previous government, where they mentioned within that document a target of 1.6 terawatt hours of biomethane injection by 2030. And we have focused on this figure in terms of mobilising an industry and how that could how could we mobilise that quantity of biomethane in the short term. And the recently published programme for government, for the new government, has a line which states that it will explore and develop potential opportunities for farmers for anaerobic digestion. So again, our document is very agricultural focused and something which offers a roadmap for the government to mobilise an industry. What our document achieves, it sets out a strategy for sustainable development of biogas and mobilisation of biogas. It does set out a roadmap how the 1.6 terawatt hour target could be achieved as per the climate action plan. It identifies the supports needed for this to happen, how it can be funded, what the benefits are, and the challenges we will face in mobilising an industry, and what are the actions required in order to mobilise an industry in the short term. And that's just a link to our document, which the slides will be available after, and the recording of this webinar will also be available after. So moving on, before I hand over to Percy, I just wanted to briefly outline to you the difference in small scale AD and medium to large scale, and this is articulated within our policy paper. But I think it's very, very important to make this very clear distinction, because sometimes biogas is talked about as one single enterprise or industry, whereas in fact there needs to be multiple scales of an industry, and the requirements at the different scales are different. So we've broken our paper into small scale AD and medium to large scale. The topic this morning is on the medium to large scale, and as I said, we will be doing a future webinar on the small scale or farm scale AD. So just I've broken the differences into 5 main areas. So location. For small scale, the location of a small scale plant would be on farm. It complements the existing farm enterprise, whereas a medium to large scale AD plant would be a cooperative style plant, and it would be centrally located within a catchment area. So it would be taking within an area that would take feedstock from a variety of different sources. So what's the farmer's role in both scales? So the farmer's role at a small scale, in our view, is to supply feedstock and operate the plant. So it's a farm-based plant. And the farmer's role in a medium to large scale AD industry would be to provide feedstock to plant operators, and the plant operators could be co-ops or private enterprises. The feedstock supply, so the feedstock for the small scale would be available on the farm with no import requirement. So that would mean that it would be available slurries, available wet residues, and potentially grass material or other biological based material. And for the medium to large scale, the feedstock supply would be sourced from many farmers and suppliers within the catchment area. So that could be, as I said, farmers, it could be hotels that might have food waste, or indeed it could be agricultural based industry, meat processing plants, or other processing plants that have animal waste that could be used. The energy demand, so the small scale plant in our document or in our approach satisfies a non-farm energy demand or in the vicinity, and that on-site energy demand would currently being provided by fossil-based fuel, and then the medium large scale, the energy demand or output from the biogas plant would be transmitted onto a grid. So that could be to produce electricity or to be put into the gas grid. And finally, there is a very clear distinction in our view of the supports that are required for both scales of industry. Capital support is required for the small scale, and we are looking at this through our EIP, European Innovation Partnership, as to what level of capital support is required to make the farm scale plants viable to construct and to develop. And the support that would be required would be capital, and they would be using the return on investment would be through offsetting of a current fossil fuel bill. And then for the medium to large scale, it would require a biogas support, and that biogas support would be required to bridge the gap between the current price or current cost of production of biogas and the current price of fossil gas, which is available on the gas grid. So my final slide before I hand over to Percy is I just want to speak a bit about how biogas can address some of the agricultural challenges faced in the country. And this is very, very important in the context of reducing emissions from the overall agricultural sector and providing alternative opportunities to farmers as well. So we see a biogas industry complementing rather than competing with mainstream food production. Manure and slurry plants should initially focus on less intensively farmed areas because we feel there's more grass material available in those areas. The grass feedstock would come from increased production and efficiency rather than existing production levels. And it's very important to point out that this increased production would come not from increased use of fertilizer, but more from the use of digested material being spread back on the land, and a reduction, actually a significant reduction or elimination in time of the use of artificial fertilizer. It would provide an alternative income stream for struggling farm sectors. We know that some sectors are under pressure, and this would provide alternative income and income streams in providing feedstock. The biogas industry can assist farmers in times of fodder shortage, and we've had a few fodder shortages in Ireland over recent years due to drought and other climatic conditions. And a lot of the material that came into the country from outside to assist farmers during those fodder shortages came from the biogas industry across Europe. So we feel a biogas industry here can build up a store or reserve of feedstock, of silage material, and in times of shortage, that feedstock could be reallocated back to farmers, and then when the grass does grow again or material becomes available, it can be replenished. And biogas operators can look at alternative sources of feedstock in those intervening periods if they do run low on grass material. And then the existing cooperative model is in place, so we should be using the existing cooperative model. We shouldn't be reinventing the wheel in terms of setting up a new system. And finally, the digestate material, which is the product at the end of the process, promotes the agricultural circular economy, and this is very important as we move forward as a country in terms of developing the overall bioeconomy for the country. So that concludes my just brief introduction. As I said, any questions that you have, please put them through the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. And I will now stop sharing, and I will hand over to Percy Foster. So Percy is the CEO of Cray, and we, as I said, we work very closely with Cray. So I'll stop sharing, Percy, and just allow you to share your screen. So it's over to you.
Hi, Sean. Just give me 1 second. I'll just put this on full screen. Thanks, Sean, for the invite and Noel to speak today. Very much welcome the opportunity just to recap on the policy document that we developed a year ago. I very much would like to acknowledge the work of my colleagues, David McDonnell and Morgan Burke, who put a lot of work into this a year ago when we were developing this with RBL. I suppose I really would like to acknowledge this, so is the department and the minister. We know we have a new minister at the moment, and last week he acknowledged the biogas sector and its opportunities to contribute towards gas to grid. It's very much welcome, and we look forward to working with the minister and his new team and the civil servants going forward in this area. When we're just preparing for this presentation, it was interesting to note, like a year ago when we're developing this, one of the funding options we proposed that there would be a PSO levy on natural gas to help fund the biomethane sector. And what's fast forward a year later, and what's interesting, over in the UK, they've just issued a consultation on that same idea, how they could fund their industry by putting a levy on natural gas to fund their biomethane industry. So I thought that was an interesting development, and maybe something that we should be looking again at in Ireland, as well as one of the funding options. So my presentation, I'll just get started. It's very short. It's just explaining the benefits. Okay, for some reason it's not moving forward.
Do you want to stop sharing, Percy, and just start sharing again?
Yeah, I'll try that. Okay.
Okay.
No, it's working. Sorry about that. So, what is the mission of this policy document? And really, it's to develop and get the biogas industry developed in the short term, and also to identify clear policy decisions that are needed and the various actions that are required to implement the policy. So the vision in the document is looking at 1.6 terawatt hours of biomethane by 2030 or even sooner. We very much are looking at this as incentivizing over phase basis over a number of years. The initial phase is looking at 65 megawatts with 25 plants around the country at various locations and obviously close to the natural gas grid as well. The document is very much focused on medium to large scale plants, and it doesn't include very small scale plants, which we are looking at in the EIP project. The support for our proposal, we're looking at 40 million for the initial phase. Some of the high level benefits that this will create is a lot of jobs, 400 jobs, and avoiding over 500,000 tons of CO2 as well. So the principles for success, they're all listed here, and I'll just run through them. They're very much self-explanatory, making sure we have the sustainable criteria achieved. It's a fully dispatchable renewable energy. We will address all the climate change and agricultural sustainability, making sure everybody along the chain gets a fair return from the support. As Sean mentioned, is very much not to compete with food. And I know last week one of our presenters at our conference was from Italy, and they have a scheme there called Biogas Done Right, where if they're growing crops, they're very much the first crop harvest is for food, and then the second crop then is for the biogas sector as well. So, and obviously, there's a lot of benefits reusing digested on the land to help grow food as well, as Sean outlined. As mentioned, the plants would be geographically located all around the country. And I suppose a big thing that I'm going to be talking about is all the various cross-sectoral benefits. They should be taken into account. And many times over the years, we feel that they haven't been recognized enough. Yes, biogas does produce renewable energy, but there's a whole range of cross-sectoral benefits that deliver economic return, and those should be taken into any costing development when you're looking at the fund biogas. Our technology is proven and tried and tested. We need to make sure that planners are fully informed around the technology to fully understand what it is. We obviously need to upskill our sector and operators within the sector and understanding of the whole biogas. We need to ensure there is appropriate engagement with the community, support the non-ETS sector, and obviously utilize the gas grid as a natural resource. So, as mentioned, the benefits, yes, it's a renewable energy source, but it has a whole range of other benefits that are attributed to biogas. So we have climate change benefits, we have environmental benefits, such as preventing food waste, going to landfill and producing digestate as a fertilizer, range of social, economic and agricultural benefits as well. I'll just go through these in detail. Renewable energy, so dispatchable, it's a continuous supply of renewable energy. It has a stable base load to transition network, security of energy supply, and obviously decarbonisation of the transport network. And that's where we all feel is where biogas can contribute a lot going forward in the transport sector in Ireland. I know recently one of our members, they have a client who's collecting their food waste for them, and all their trucks now are used with biomethane. So that's a great initiative to see that starting in Ireland. Agricultural benefits, obviously, it's diversification for farmers, substituting, having to avoid some chemical fertilizers. So the digestate is a great source of nutrients, and it helps over time to reduce the amount of chemical fertilizers that are bought by farmers. that whole area of improving soil quality is definitely on a discussion at the moment, and that's where digestate can help with that. Helping farmers transition to a low carbon, and obviously decarbonising them as well to meet the food-wise targets. Social economic benefits, obviously capital investment creates a lot of jobs, 400 jobs in our proposal. You know, we're making sure that the support that everybody in a regional development are supported around the country where the facilities are located. And it also provides opportunities, maybe new opportunities in the future to develop some value-added byproducts from the process. I know some people are looking at ammonium sulfate as a byproduct to develop from their biogas process. The environmental benefits, it's quite clear, you know, you're avoiding waste going to landfills, you're helping meet national recycling targets, you're recycling nutrients back to soil. So it really is a good example of a circular economy where waste is collected, processed, and the nutrients recycled back onto the land to grow food again. Reducing ammonia emissions and runoff from nutrients to watercourses, and particularly when you're dealing with slurries and wastes, by processing them in the biogas process, you are reducing and killing the pathogens. So obviously there's a reduced risk of pathogens to the soil from digestate compared to untreated slurries. And I suppose finally, the climate change benefits. Obviously, it helps us meet the various climate change targets, replacing fossil fuels for renewable gas, and the obvious one of reducing greenhouse gas emissions as well. So I think if there's one take home from the presentation today is that biogas is not just a source of renewable energy. It has a wide range of cross-sectoral benefits that people should take into account when they're calculating the benefits of AD and coming up at deciding on the support levels that are required for AD. It's something that we feel that isn't recognised enough by the policymakers. So that's the end of my section of the presentation. So thank you, Sean.
Thanks very much, Percy, for that, and for clearly outlining the benefits of a sector and the other aspects as well. Now I'll hand over to Noel Gavigan. So Noel is the technical executive at the Irish Bioenergy Association, and Noel will present on the costings, the funding options, and also on the sustainability criteria, but also the scale of an industry across Europe and Ireland at the moment. So I hand over to you, Noel, for you to start your presentation.
Thanks very much, Sean. Yeah, I'm just going to give a bit of a context in terms of where the biogas industry is in Ireland and at an EU level. Then we'll look into the costings that we worked out in our work with CRAE.
You just turn on your full screen, Noel. You just turn on your full screen, Noel. Sorry to interrupt you.
Sorry, what?
Just share your full screen. Yeah.
What can you actually see there, Sean?
Just reshare now. Just reshare your screen.
Let me see that. Is that showing right there now?
And just go into presentation mode. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. That's working out. Sorry about that. No, apologies. So essentially to look at where we are at a European level and where Ireland fits in with that currently. Now, we've had an extensive rollout program across Europe over the last 2 decades in terms of the number of biogas plants installed. Predominantly, the leader in that has really been Germany. Italy has followed up with a substantial number as well. And we see certain areas where there's quite a bit of development going on in the UK over the last couple of years. In France at the moment, there's a lot going on in biomethane. And they're installing several plants at the moment. They were in the order of several dozen per year at this point in time. So there's a bit of a resurgence going on there. And you tend to find that across Europe that we depending on what grant systems come in and different policies, you will tend to see different countries will start adopting the technology at different rates to each other. So it has meant that the industry and the build out industry for biogas essentially moves from country to country. depending on the local conditions. So as it stands in Europe, you can see there from 2000, the last 10 years, we've gone from 10,000 plants, which were predominantly built in the previous 10 years, up to a little over 18,000 plants now, or that's in 2018. So we're hoping to have updated figures for 2019 in the coming months. So you can see where the scale is. You can see that there was quite a substantial amount put in the first part of the last decade, and that has leveled off to a certain extent in the last while. But there's been a predominance for plants moving from electrical in the first part to biomethane plants in the second half. And that's something that we will look at in an Irish context. This is just a graph to show you the different range of numbers that we see across Europe. As you can see, Germany and Italy, they actually have a separate, all these figures are from the European Biogas Association, of which both ourselves and Korea are members. You can see that they actually use different scales for Germany and Italy on the side here. This is up to 5,000, and even at that, you can't capture the full German quantity of 11,000 plants in total. You have Italy coming in at 1,600, and then you're down to France, and you can see tailing off using a different scale here. If you're looking for Ireland, it's here at 29, but over half of those would be sludge treatment plants, which would be on site for wastewater treatment. So the likes of Ringsend would be included in there. So the predominant number of what you would classify as a biogas plant in Ireland are actually wastewater treatment plants. And they're not your typical biogas plant built for energy purposes or agricultural waste purposes. So you can see there that there's quite a range from across the UK and France are quite a number there. You will see places, depending on population wide, like Sweden have quite a number of plants based on population. So, you know, there's a little way few different ways you can look at those figures. But it gives you an idea that there's quite a scale, or quite a range in penetration, market penetration across Europe. In terms of the biomethane plants, this is really where things are starting to move over the last while. We see that the biomethane and using it for gas injection onto the grid, or using it for a vehicle fuel, does offer many other uses for biogas rather than just electricity. So whereas electricity is obviously available, you know, to connect onto the grid is available in practically part of Europe. Getting onto the gas grid is a little bit more difficult, but there's further options on what you can use that gas for. As you can see, there's a predominance there in Germany where you've got 200 plants, small percentage of their overall number, but it's still 200 plants producing biomethane. UK is up on 100 plants. France is at 76, but that number has, as far as I'm aware, has gone over 100 at this stage and is probably plowing on quite strongly based on the number of plants they're putting in. France has really taken on the concept of biomethane over the last while. And you can see, again, Sweden at 72 is quite high compared to its previous figure. So you can see that there's quite a lot of adoption there. Italy is low at 8, but they are advancing strongly in that. Italy is an interesting country in that they have over 1 million cars and vehicles running on fossil gas. So it does lend them quite readily to looking at using biomethane in the vehicle fleet. And one of the strengths of using biomethane for the vehicle fleet is there's very few options when we're looking at electrification of vehicles. There's very few options for heavy transport, for buses, for heavy goods vehicles. Electrification of those at the moment is not really a viable option for long distance travel, but for biomethane it really is. You can, as it stands, buy a biomethane truck off the shelf and adopt them into your fleet, and there are quite a number of them in Ireland at the moment. They are running on fossil gas, but the option is to run them in biomethane, and it is a very strong way of decarbonising the heavy goods transport. So it is something where we would see a lot more potential in the years to come. Our current situation in Ireland is we have 16 biogas plants. There is, and they can vary that number slightly depending on what you classify a biogas plant is, but I've kept a number of wastewater treatment plants out of that figure. I've kept it separate. We have 15 that we're aware of wastewater treatment plants using anaerobic digestion technology. So some, but not all of them, are using the gas for energy. Some are just flaring off the gas. So it's really just as a part of the wastewater treatment process that they use AD. And so on that context, there's not a lot of energy recovery off those 15 plants. What we're seeing in Ireland is the scale at the moment is from about 250 kilowatt up to 5 megawatt. Predominantly they're using materials, waste materials, very few using crop at the moment, but predominantly either collected waste, your brown bin waste, or industrial food waste. And a good few would be using agricultural residues as well, so your chicken litter, your slurries, and they're spread across the country. So really and truly, I suppose where we would see the scale going, and you will see scales where people talk about the size of a biogas plant. In electrical terms, one size is 25 megawatt. If you were to put that into biomethane, you're talking about 12 to 15 megawatt in terms of biomethane, because of the efficiency of converting to electrical. We currently have one biomethane injection point. There's a second one going in the next while. So that's where you can take, if you were producing biomethane, you can bring it to this point and inject it onto the grid. That's in Cush in County Kildare. There's one biogas plant not far from there which produces biomethane. They have the upgrade equipment for doing so, and they would predominantly not be shipping it onto the grid, because at the moment there isn't a mechanism to cover the cost, and I'll go through that in a moment. So, and I've gone through the number of plants we have across Europe. So that's just a quick synopsis of where we are in Ireland. So as you can see, there's plenty of scope for growth here in Ireland, and we will be poised with the proper supports that we've seen in other countries to have a substantial industry here. In terms of the EU sustainability criteria, and it's very important that we look at this. This is there was the EU directive that came out in 2018, was very far-reaching and a very useful piece of work in terms of the entire bioenergy space. Everyone, I think, would be aware of, there's been certain aspects where people are saying, is bioenergy carbon neutral? Is it, where is it acceptable, where is it not? So the RED directive was very sensibly put together. It is a very powerful piece of legislation, and what it does is it enshrines the sustainability of bioenergy sources. Now, we are the only renewable source that has got this level of scrutiny put on it, but happily so. You won't see the same for wind or solar or the other renewables. But this very strongly puts together a lot of criteria for anybody that is looking to produce a bioenergy source. So it looks at the legality of operations. So not so much an issue for when you come to the biogas side of it, but what does come to the fore is the protection of sensitive habitats, wetlands and peatlands. So depending on what cropping you're putting in, depending on what materials you're using, it will, and where you're growing them, it will really look at that to ensure that you're protecting the local environment. The protection of soil quality, and soils increasingly are seen as vital in terms of our ability to absorb carbon. The soils around the world, they absorb far more carbon than are in the atmosphere, and they're seen as the major sink, and an area where we're probably going to see a lot more attention on over the next couple of years. In terms of they're about 4 times this sink size in terms of, compared to the atmosphere. So it's a considerable place for carbon sink. So protection of soil and ensuring that our soils are healthy is vital in that sense. The protection of biodiversity again leads itself a little bit into the habitats and wetlands, but the protection of biodiversity is core to the RED II directive. And then ensuring the sustainability of the long-term practice, of your long-term cropping of a material. What is the overall impact of maintaining that year on, year out, and ensuring that that is going to be something that it is sustainable. So in fairness, it's a very sensible piece of work. It's a very extensive piece of work, and it is essentially the Bible by which we will be working on well into the future. And it's something we've been doing quite a lot of work on getting familiar with over the last couple of years. There's aspects of it coming into line very shortly. A couple of headline figures on that, they're looking at what are the overall greenhouse gas saving with levels. So certain technologies will save certain amounts of greenhouse gas compared to the fossil fuel equivalent. So a very quick example would be in heating terms, where your kerosene might produce 80 grams of carbon per kilowatt hour. You would find that wood chip might produce 5 or 6. You would find that biogas would produce from less than, it goes into the negative if you're using animal slurries, up to maybe 20, 25, we're told, if you're using grass. But what you're looking at, what is the overall savings in that? So in order to comply with the RED II directive, they set very clear criteria in that. So you need to have 65% reduction for transport, and that's acknowledging that transport is one of the most difficult sectors to decarbonise. If you're looking at electricity, heating or cooling, it's set at 70% from 2021, and that'll move to 80% by 2026. So we will see that overall ramping going on past 2026. It'll probably go from 80 to 85. We will see that in time. Similar to where transport started off at 50% many years ago, it's currently at 60. Or sorry, started off at 55. It's currently at 60, and it's going to 65 as of January. So that criteria is an ongoing requirement. Now, in terms of the piece of work we've done with within IRBI and CRE and how we're looking at this industry being rolled out and how it can be properly supported, we are really looking at this program of having an initial phase which would require approximately 40 million to fund. It would be for the build out of 25 plants approximately, and it would, you can see that we've set out the savings in terms of 500,000 tons of CO2, and it would be the equivalent of 65 megawatts of biomethane. You can see the equivalent there in terms of electrical. The figures we have below there, we have scaled it out in terms of the size of plant, in terms of the feedstock that's used. So you can see there for manure or grass silage, a mix of manure and grass silage, you will need more of a subsidy. And the subsidy line is basically your 9 cent, 7 cent, and 6 cent. That requires more, because if you're having to purchase feedstock, purchase grass silage, it's obviously going to cost more than if you're using food waste, where the plant may be getting a gate fee for taking in the material in the first place. So there are differences there. Now, those prices are based on this is on top of the wholesale gas price. So the idea is you would produce biomethane, put it onto the grid, sell that to a supplier who again in turn sells it on to a customer. But on top of that, they will be giving you the wholesale price, which they would have to pay to current fossil gas price, and they get this subsidy comes in on top. Sorry. So these prices were based on the price 18 months ago of 3 cents per kilowatt hour. That's currently dropped to 1.5 cents for fossil gas. So fossil prices have dropped considerably over in the same time period. So whether it's going to be through carbon taxing or whether the market is going to increase that price back up, we have to see. The carbon, just for indicative purposes, the current carbon tax is in around at 28 euros a ton, adds about half a cent to your per kilowatt. So if we see it going to 100, which is the policy of the current government, to go to 100 euros per ton by 2030, that will add 2 cents per kilowatt hour, approximately 2 cents. So it gives you a bit of a ballpark figure to see where that's supposed to come from. So in terms of the funding options, well, really the main options we're looking there is a PSO levy on fossil gas, which has been proposed. We would just go down to the third point there, which is the ring fencing of carbon tax. So whether we look at all carbon taxes that are generated and look at taking a fund from that to fund the aforementioned supports, or whether we look at carbon tax increasing to a level to provide that. But we're not likely to see it going up to provide 9 cents, obviously not, because the carbon tax price would be extremely high just on fossil gas. So, but we do need to see support coming through, either generation through carbon tax or the PSO levy. Now, as Sean would have spoke of earlier, there are benefits for this for several departments, 7 departments, when we looked across all the different areas, from transport, from environment, to the Department of Taoiseach, to agriculture. Addressed. The SSRH, which is in operation, offers 3 cents per kilowatt hour, which obviously goes some way towards it. Again, along with tax breaks, low interest loans to assist developers to build these sort of plants would be of great benefit. The other thing to look at here is the renewable electricity support scheme. Predominantly where we're looking at biogas plants going into electricity, there has been the refit scheme, which closed for new applicants a couple of years ago. But to get that level of support within the RESS, the current pricing we would have seen for solar and wind was about 7.5 cents. We would need a good bit higher for biogas, and that would have to, the reason we would argue that there should be a higher level of support is because of all those cross benefits from environment, protection of water quality, protection of reduction of ammonia coming from agriculture. There are so many different areas there in waste management policy that this comes into, that we need one place to get that valued and added in. But it's different. One of the biggest issues for biogas is there are so many benefits spread across so many areas. How do you gather all that value together and put it into one package? And that has been a considerable problem. But within the RESS, if there is an allocated portion within that, similar to what happened for solar in the last round, if there is an allocated section for biogas, it would be of great benefit, even just on a pilot scale, to allow a number of plants to develop to a point where we can get a better understanding of the technology and how it can fit into our grid. So just to conclude very quickly, because we're short on time, the benefits of this are not just in the energy sector, and capturing those benefits and valuing those benefits is a key part of understanding biogas. Percy would have went through 2 slides there where there's extensive benefits across various different sectors, everything from energy to environment to agriculture to transport to there's a whole waste management. There's a whole series of benefits, and getting those values together to better understanding is a key part. Again, because of that diversity of benefits, it spreads across a lot of different departments, across 7 departments. So the political vision to supply to support a coherent approach on that is wanting, and has been wanting for some time. Other countries have done this. We've seen that, and we've listed the successes there in Sweden, Denmark, Germany, France, Austria, and the UK, because they've got that together, they've pulled together that cohesion, looked at all those benefits, quantified them up, and have been able to put together an understandable package that the industry can then therefore work with. So, and it has made it a mainstream technology across Europe from that. So there are significant benefits, but it does need, as we say here, a whole of government approach to gather all those benefits together into one single valuation, and to from that point on, we can then roll out these facilities to gather our food waste, to take on our crops, our surplus crops, and to be able to produce a very viable renewable source of energy. So I'll leave it up to Sean if you want to. I know we'll have a question and answer section after this.
Okay, thanks very much, Noel, for your presentation. Thanks also to Percy. So if I could ask yourself and Percy to just keep your videos on. So just to remind everyone again, there's a Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. If you would like to send forward a question, feel free to do it as soon as possible, so we try and get to all the questions by the end of the session. We'll be finishing up at 10:30. There are a couple of questions in here, and just a question from, or a series of questions from Tim. Have Crane Energy made a submission to government regarding the subsidy for gas to grid? I suppose the answer to that is we have. Percy and ourselves, and Percy and Crane ourselves and Erbia have worked together on a policy paper. We have submitted that to the government, various government departments that are relevant in this space, and we've had various meetings, and our lobbying efforts continue in that regard. And if you have, has there been a response from government, and is there any update on the subsidy? So I'll just take those 2 briefly before I hand over to the lads. The response from government is that they see biomethane as an expensive technology when compared to other renewable energy technologies. But we're very clear to point out that a biomethane industry offers significant benefits across many government departments, and that's why Noel would have mentioned up to 7 benefiting from an industry. And we can't just assess biomethane on the basis of comparing it to other renewable technologies, because it does have added benefits in terms of its dispatchability, but also in terms of rural development, in terms of jobs. So really just to say that it's an ongoing effort on both organisations' behalf to lobby on this and to ensure that we get a support scheme in place, but we have no indication as to when that will happen. I suppose the one thing I would like to point out is that our document doesn't articulate the vision that other organisations, other stakeholders have articulated, in that we have very clearly focused on how to mobilise an industry, how to get a number of plants in place, tens of plants into the country before we can have hundreds of plants and get the industry up and running. And we're very much in that space as to how that could happen. Percy, I'll come to you maybe just on a question there. As regard to Res 1, obviously the subsidy was for wind and solar. Can you just maybe outline what we would like in terms of biogas from the from the electricity perspective?
Yeah. Yeah, well, in the whole process in developing RES, it was always said that RES would be technology neutral. However, when it was published, there was a dedicated category for solar. So we wrote to the department about that in the new year, welcoming they've a dedicated section for solar, and would they consider a dedicated category for biogas. So the response at that stage was that the department would engage with us once the first auction has been done to look at the results. And that first auction is just over, obviously, a few weeks ago. So now is really to re-engage with the department and talk to them again about will they consider a dedicated category for biogas.
Thanks, Percy. Noel, I'll hand over to you. Just a question from Brian there. Have you anything on, and it's separate to this topic, gasification, green hydrogen, or catalytic upgrading? So do you just want to mention something on that, or a separate topic?
Something, an area we might look at doing a piece of work on later on. I suppose predominantly we're looking at just traditional biogas at this point in time. But definitely hydrogen appears to be coming back on the agenda after about a 10-year hiatus. It was something that was strongly discussed many years ago, and it was pushed to one side. So basically in terms of cost. So it appears to be something that's really pushing forward again, and perhaps technology has moved on to bring this on. So in fairness, it's something we want to explore next, but don't have much of it as yet.
Okay, thanks very much, Noel. Just over to you, Percy, there. Just a question from Xavier about grass production and also the impact on water quality. Can you just explain how the use of digestate would improve in terms of helping in terms of water quality and also in terms of production of grass and offset of fossil fertilizer?
Yeah, so a lot of work has been done by Chagas a few years ago. I think the researcher was Origo Kiley, where he looked at grasses for biogas and how to increase grass production. I forget the exact details of that research finding, but I know it was published. So I think there's a lot of good work, if I remember right, around or giving guidance of how to look at the right species of grass and how to increase grass production using digestate. I suppose digestate, compared to raw slurries, is free from pathogens. It's been pasteurized. The nutrients are typically more in a plant-enabled format, so the more uptake of nutrients by plants compared to chemical fertilizers. So I kind of direct people back to Origo Kiley and the research he did there in Chagas around this topic.
And also just on a follow-up point, Xavier, you mentioned about biodiversity. Obviously, by reducing the amount of chemical fertilizer input, it would help and assist through potentially biodiversity. So we wouldn't see any issues around biodiversity through maybe increasing grass production, because the grass is being produced from digested material rather than fossil fertilizer, fossil-based fertilizer, artificial fertilizer, chemical fertilizer. So that's just to close out on that point. And Noel, handing over to you and back to you. Question from Philip. How might the introduction of an EU-wide carbon credit scheme and voluntary carbon market help develop an Irish biogas industry? So potentially is one of the funding options. So can you just maybe give your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it comes down to the value of carbon and how we value it. As you can see, if we look at, say, 100 euros a tonne on carbon, it'll add 2 cents onto the value of the gas, assuming just on an energy basis. If you're looking at the fact that you're using slurries or manures, where you've got additional reduction in greenhouse gases, we can add significantly to that. But it really comes down to pricing. It would be a benefit, absolutely, and but it just needs to capture all of the benefits in terms of what it's doing, not just in terms of the gas it's replacing, but also in the waste materials that it's dealing with, and ensuring that they're not producing other greenhouse gases. And if we're allowed to value that, which we should be, then it'll add significantly to the value or to the volume of carbon saved. And that can obviously lead into being traded and getting value for it.
Okay, over to you, Percy. A kind of a question that's coming into your area. Is digestate accepted by the organic associations as organic fertilizer? So do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, we are just at the final stages of a research project. We're looking at an updated compost quality standard in Ireland and looking at a digestate quality standard in Ireland. So as part of that, we would have collated a lot of data on digestate from various plants around the country. And what was interesting is the heavy metal limits are very low in digestate and would meet the organic requirements. So the answer is yes, digestate, as far as I'm aware, does cover under organic certification. I don't think anybody has done it to date, but from the data that we've gathered up in the research project, it looks like digestate would be within the heavy metal limit requirements for organic certification.
Okay, thanks, Percy. Just Thomas had a couple of other questions here. One about any capital grants for on-farm plants from the Department of Agriculture. So that will be the focus of our discussion in 2 weeks' time on the small scale. So if you would, there are none available at present. Any capital grants available, but it's something we're working on. So if you could maybe come back and join us in 2 weeks' time, we can further explore that topic. Also, you mentioned here, Thomas, about cooperative livestock markets are under pressure at the moment. I agree in terms of the potential of the cooperative movement, livestock markets, all other cooperatives in the country as being potential collectors of feedstock and even potential plant operators. So certainly does present opportunities for potential livestock markets. And we've engaged with a number of the livestock markets. I've presented at a number of their meetings about the opportunities which could be available through this industry if it was up and running. John, a question over to you, Noel, there from John. 2 questions. I'll bring them together because time is moving on. What selection criteria used when choosing injection point locations? So maybe just to comment on that. And outside of the feedstock limits, what are the limits to incorporating large proportions of biogas into the existing gas network infrastructure? So Noel, if you could just comment on those 2 maybe collectively, because we are running tight on time.
I suppose there are questions really in terms of how gas networks policy will dictate how they are answered. The biogas, obviously, we'd like to see the biogas injection locations spread throughout the country in places where they're very accessible to a maximum number of plants, and predominantly in areas where there is obviously most feedstock available, because what really ties the location of a biogas plant is availability of feedstock. So in terms of the limits of incorporating large portions of biogas into the existing, the outside of feedstock, well, feedstock is really the main limit. Apart from that, it's getting those injection points in place and getting the biogas plants built is the biggest limit. Is at the moment getting the support for the gas going onto the grid, which it's not sufficient at the moment to build our plant.
Okay, thanks, Noel. Just a couple of other issues that are arising here. One is there's a question here about the availability of grass as a feedstock on an ongoing basis, given that some years there is a shortage of grass as forage. So just to let everyone know, I've circulated the link to our policy paper in the chat function. So if you want to copy that, because once the webinar ends, you won't be able to see the link, obviously. But if you can copy that link onto your desktop or onto a document, you can access the paper. And there's quite an extensive amount of information about the availability of feedstock, the availability of grass. We would envisage that the grass would become from additional potential production from areas that aren't at current optimum levels of production from a grass perspective. And very clearly, it is widely known across Europe that the biogas industry operates as a reserve and a buffer for feedstock. So in the event of a shortage of grass or silage, then biogas plants can offer as a reserve in that regard and give back the silage to farmers for the price they got paid for it. And return that same feedstock then once supplies become available again. So we have addressed that within the document. If you'd like to, the person that asked that question, like to review that. Just to conclude, there's one question there on planning. So I don't know if Percy or Noel wants to just address it. Did other countries experience the same planning issues for these projects that emerged here? So we have seen a few issues arising in terms of refusals and also public kind of dissatisfaction with plants being located close to them. So Noel, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, very quickly. We 2 or 3 years ago at this stage, we done a piece of work for planners in identifying the issues that can come about. The issue we have here in Ireland is often the planners do not know what they're dealing with when it comes to a biogas plant or a large bioenergy plant, because they haven't dealt with it before. So we have put together a piece of work for them to assist them on that. But it's ultimately, it is a difficulty in terms of, even I'm aware of a plant where you've one successfully working in a village and without any issue, yet a local town where there's one plant, there was massive local objection, and they're only 10 miles apart. So there is a difficulty in the hearts and minds in getting people to accept these in many places. Other places, there's not an issue at all. So it's unfortunately, we need to change from a situation where it's the luck of the draw in terms of whether you're going to have planning issues or not. There needs to be a sensible approach from the planners, and there needs to be a coherent approach from planners in terms of how these are assessed, and to ensure proper planning is adhered to, but also to ensure that these plants can be built where they are aligning with proper guidelines.
Okay, thanks, Noel. Percy, I'll bring you into the last question, which is probably relevant. It's to do with ABP. Just a question from Xavier, and if you want to comment on the planning when you can as well. Do you envisage that there would be any reluctance by farmers or the food industry to the application of digesters from ABP AD plants onto farmland? So maybe we concluded that question from you, Percy. If you want to comment on the planning issue, you can as well, of course. So.
Sure. I think when it comes to planning, is all about engagement with the local community. You have to engage early on, provide independent information about AD. SCI have some information around that, and RB as well. So it's really about engaging with the local community and educating with the correct facts. I was a number of years ago at a information meeting for a member with local community, and a lot of it, there was misinformation spread by an individual. And I think, once all the facts are laid out, that's independent, I think that people can be educated and make up their own minds. In relation to digestate going onto land, I suppose all digestate from ABP facilities have to meet the EU processing standard to ensure that there is pathogen kill. So I don't envisage an issue from farmers. I think they just need to be educated more about the properties of it. There is a recent EU project done called, if I remember right, We're New to Farm. It's Cork IT are one of the leaders in it, and they looked at over about 1,200 farmers' views about using digestate and compost on land. I think there's a lot of interesting information there, and I think once farmers are educated about the properties of digestate and how to use it, I don't envisage it being a problem. Currently, at the moment, if I remember looking at a survey we did, there is at least 60 to 70,000 tonnes of digestate in land spread at the moment in Ireland. So it's quite a big amount already, and it's done under, in accordance with the nitrate regulations and the ABP regulations. So I don't envisage a problem once people are educated about how to use it and understand it.
Okay, thanks very much, Percy, and I hope we have kind of covered the main topics that were raised as part of the questions. I'd like to thank you, Percy, thanks to Noel for presenting this morning. I'd like to also acknowledge Teresa O'Brien, who works behind the scenes to make all this happen for us. Thanks very much, Teresa. Only for you, we wouldn't be able to roll out this series. And just to let you all know that the next webinar will take place in 2 weeks' time. It's Wednesday fortnight's time. It will be on the small scale biogas topic. We will publish details in the coming days. The other thing to point out is I did share the link to our policy paper in the chat button earlier, or chat function earlier. If anyone has any questions, feel free to get in touch with us, and it is available on our website. And the other item, just to say, if you have any interest in further discussing with us the topic, biogas topic, feel free to get in touch with either Irby or Cray, and we'll be happy to provide you with whatever information you require. And so on that, I'd just like to thank you all for participating. Thanks to all our speakers. Thanks to Teresa. And we look forward to meeting you the next time. Thank you.
Thank you.